This $100 bill looks valuable, right? Now imagine this same bill but 50 years ago. What could it buy then? A week's worth of groceries, a fancy night out, maybe even a month's rent. Today, this $100 bill might barely cover your weekly grocery run, and it certainly won't pay for a month's rent in most places. So what happened? Where did all that value go? The answer, my friend, is inflation. That silent, insidious force that's been eroding your wealth, your savings, your very financial future, often without you even realizing it. You've probably heard it defined as rising prices or too much money chasing too few goods. But these simplistic explanations barely scratch the surface. At its core, inflation is a decrease in the purchasing power of money. In other words, as inflation rises, your money will buy fewer goods and services. It's as if your money is shrinking in your hands. According to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, what cost around $1 in 1960 will cost about $9.95 in 2023. That's a cumulative rate of inflation of almost 900% in over 63 years. But inflation isn't just about rising prices. It affects every aspect of our financial lives. It impacts our savings, our investments, our debts, and even our career choices. Think about it this way. If you kept $10,000 under your mattress for 10 years, and inflation averaged 3% during that time, your $10,000 will only have the purchasing power of about $7,400 at the end of that decade. Now, you didn't lose any dollars, but you lost nearly 30% of your purchasing power. This is the insidious nature of inflation. It doesn't announce itself, it just creeps up slowly, often unnoticed, until one day you find yourself wondering why your paycheck doesn't seem to stretch as far as it used to. So what exactly causes inflation? There are several widely accepted theories, one of which is what economists call demand pull inflation. This occurs when the demand for goods and services in an economy outpaces the supply, thus pushing prices upward. For example, during the holiday season, a particular toy might become the must-have item for children everywhere. Parents eager to fulfill their kids' wishes will likely rush to stores and online shops buying up every available unit. Retailers, seeing the overwhelming demand, will likely raise prices to keep pace, since they know that desperate parents will pay whatever it takes to secure the toy. This scarcity drives prices higher and higher, forcing some families to pay exorbitant amounts just to avoid disappointing their children. And this rise in prices is inflation. Next, there's cost-push inflation, which occurs when the overall price level in an economy increases due to the rising cost of production. This type of inflation is driven by an increase in the cost of inputs used to produce goods and services rather than by changes in the level of consumer demands. It can be triggered by factors such as rising cost of raw materials, increased labor costs, higher energy prices, currency devaluation, or new taxes that increase the cost of production. A good example of this occurred in the 1970s oil crisis, where sharp increases in oil prices led to widespread price increase across the board. Similarly, inflation can rise as a result of government policies. For example, during an economic downturn, the government might issue stimulus checks to encourage spending and boost the economy, similar to what we witnessed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now imagine the government is running low on funds, but still needs to cover its expenses. They might consider printing more money as a solution. While this might seem like an easy fix, it comes with a significant drawback, because increasing the money supply without a corresponding increase in goods or services is like adding water to a pot of soup. There's more liquid, but the soup is now diluted, so each spoonful has less flavor. Similarly, when more money is added to the economy without an increase in production, each currency loses value, leading to inflation. This is exactly what happened in places like Zimbabwe and Venezuela. They went a bit overboard with the money printing press and things went pretty wild. In both cases, the excessive printing of money to cover government spending led to hyperinflation, where prices increased at extreme rates, sometimes by thousands or even millions of percent per year. This made basic goods unaffordable for most people, leading to severe economic and social crises. It's worth noting that a small level of inflation is generally considered normal and even beneficial for a healthy economy. Most central banks, including the Federal Reserve in the United States, aim for an inflation rate of around 2% per year. That's because this level of inflation encourages spending and investment while being low enough to not cause economic instability. Here's the bad news. If you keep cash savings, inflation will gradually decrease what that money can buy. This effect is particularly pronounced over long periods. For example, if you had $50,000 in savings in 1990, it will have the same purchasing power as about $111,000 in 2023. But if you didn't grow that $50,000 through investments or interest that outpaced inflation, you've effectively lost more than half of your purchasing power over those 33 years. But the impact of inflation isn't just limited to cash savings. It affects nearly every aspect of your financial life. Take your salary for instance. If your annual raise doesn't keep pace with inflation, you are effectively taking a pay cut each year. Let's say you earn $50,000 a year and received a 2% raise, but inflation is running at 3%. In real terms, your purchasing power has decreased by 1%. Inflation can also erode the value of fixed income investments like bonds. If you buy a bond paying 3% interest while inflation is 2%, your real return after accounting for inflation will be only 1%. If inflation raises to 4%, you are now losing purchasing power despite earning interest. Even real estate, often touted as a hedge against inflation, isn't completely immune. While property values often rise with inflation, the cost associated with home ownership, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance typically increases as well, potentially outpacing the appreciation of the property itself. Inflation can also be particularly cruel to retirees living on fixed incomes. Social security benefits are often adjusted for inflation, but these adjustments may not fully capture the rising costs faced by seniors, particularly in healthcare. Perhaps most insidiously, inflation can impact your behaviors in ways you might not realize. As prices rise, you might find yourself making small compromises like buying cheaper brands, eating out less often, and postponing major purchases. Over time, these small changes can add up to a significant reduction in your quality of life. What's more, inflation can push you into higher tax brackets, even if your real income hasn't increased. This phenomenon is known as bracket creep. It occurs when tax brackets aren't adequately adjusted for inflation. To put some numbers to this, imagine you earned $50,000 in 2000 and received raises that exactly match inflation each year. By 2023, you'd be earning about $86,000, the amount needed to have the same purchasing power as $50,000 in 2000. But unless tax brackets were perfectly adjusted for inflation, you'd likely find yourself in higher tax brackets, paying a larger percentage of your income in taxes despite no real increase in your purchasing power. Inflation is a global phenomenon, and its impacts can vary dramatically from country to country. In the developing world, inflation rates can be much higher than what we typically see in the United States or Europe. For instance, as of 2024, countries like Argentina, Turkey, and Nigeria are grappling with annual inflation rates of around 30%. To put this in perspective, at these inflation rates, prices double roughly every 18 months. Imagine the pain of your grocery bill doubling in less than 2 years. This level of inflation can be economically devastating, leading to social unrest and political instability. The varying inflation rates around the world also impacts international trade and investments. Countries with high inflation rates often see their currencies depreciate against those of low inflation countries. This can make imports more expensive for high inflation countries, which will potentially lead to even higher domestic prices. If you've enjoyed this video or gained any value from it, please consider subscribing. And you can check these other videos and I will see you there.